Here. I just want to thank all of you for joining us. And I am super excited also to be here with my two amazing colleagues, Sasha and Josh. Both of them have been in this initiative with me since the beginning. And this is truly a project that is a community project. We are here to serve the community, and we are a community, which I think is what makes this project quite special. So we are going to talk tonight about understanding the impact of anti-Semitism on mental health, and JCMHI both conducts research on the impact of anti-Semitism on mental health of our Jewish community, and we also directly support our Jewish community. So maybe we can change slides now. Sasha is going to be managing that, which thank you so much. Okay. So the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative is a community of over 90 volunteer psychologists, clinicians, educators, and researchers. We formed after 10/7 in response to the rise in anti-Semitism, the grief, the isolation, the broken relationships that the Jewish community was experiencing. And our initiative is one that has a structure underneath the umbrella of the American Psychological Foundation. We were able to begin an official collaboration with them in June 2024. We have an advisory council that is a group of 4 who interacts directly with APF around issues of grant writing and funding, as well as all the organizational pieces to JCMHI. We, as a community, provide direct support, as I mentioned, to the Jewish community in the form of virtual support groups. We now currently run around 25 support groups that are open to our public. So in many ways, we think about ourselves as being on the front lines of Jewish mental health. Anyone who identifies as Jewish is able to come to one of our free virtual support groups. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We also provide support to private organizations. So we have many Jewish organizations, for example, that come to us and ask to have a support group for their professionals. We also work with Jewish ERGs and companies and organizations. And sometimes that might look like providing 3 to 5 sessions of support, or it may look like something longer. We've provided up to a year of support for organizations. So really what happened was actually, let me just keep going a little bit more about our structure. We have committees as part of the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative, in addition to providing the direct support and the research. As time has gone on, we recognized the need to develop more resources. So we created a resource committee that I mentioned earlier. You can visit our website and access, once you are a member of the website, you can access the resources that are developed that are all related to Jewish mental health and coping and resilience. We also have a program evaluation committee because we're doing program evaluation from both the facilitator perspective and the participant perspective for our support groups. We have an outreach committee so we can continue to collaborate with various organizations in mental health and the Jewish community. We also recently developed our K through 12 committee because we have recognized there's more and more of a need to begin working directly with teens and educators in the K through 12 space. This project began really on campuses, but we are clearly widening our outreach as the needs continue to persist. So after 10/7, actually, Sasha, I'm not done yet. Sorry. So after 10/7, we recognized, a group of psychologists recognized that there was a need to address what we were seeing on campuses, which was, as all of us here, I'm sure, remember and still observe, a real significant rise in anti-Semitism. So a task force began a few weeks after 10/7. And what we did was we started where we had responded to other disasters and crises. So we looked to how we responded during COVID, the Maui fires, the Surfside building collapse, and we really decided that we would like to begin with psychological first aid. This is something that we're going to go into a little bit more later, how we tailored that to the Jewish community. But it was a response that we felt matched the circumstances due to the disruption, routine, relationships, and really changes in life patterns for our Jewish community. We collaborated with various Jewish organizations. We helped survey their needs. Some of the organizations internally surveyed their needs. We conducted many focus groups, again, really started with the campus community, students, graduate students, parents of students, and faculty on campus. And then we slowly but surely widened our reach because we were getting more and more requests for various communities within our Jewish community to support. For example, now at this time, we work with anyone who is 18 all the way through retirement. We have a support group for retirees. Um, we we trained initially everyone in psychological first aid, but then we began to recognize that there was a need to look even further into what was happening with our Jewish community, and we've tailored training over time to include other trauma informed, evidence informed trainings. And a lot of that took place within two relationships. One, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. We have an expert trainer who is on our planning committee. And we also worked very closely and still do with Natal Global Resiliency from Israel. We have many types of support groups. We have our regular all-inclusive Jewish adult group. Anyone who identifies as Jewish and is 18 or over can attend that. And then we have various affinity groups. And as I mentioned, groups for retirees, groups for descendants of the Holocaust, LGBTQ plus groups, graduate student groups, many, many more, parents of teens. So clinician training, I'll just go into briefly. As I mentioned, psychological first aid, that over many months, we actually worked in collaboration with both Natal and the National Child Traumatic Stress Network to tailor it to the needs of the Jewish community and to implement it within support groups. We worked with mindfulness and meditation experts. We also worked with helping our community understand traumatic invalidation, the symptoms, and how to address it. We'll go into that a little bit more later. And now I'm turning it over to Sasha.
Perfect. Thank you, Tara. So a lot of what we'll talk about, Tara kind of introduced our project and how it started, how it's grown. And a lot of what we'll talk about in this presentation is really what we've noticed in terms of the impact of anti-Semitism on mental health, primarily from our support groups and participants who have come, as well as from some of the research. So what we initially started to see, and I'm sure all of this will not be a surprise to most people here, but a number of things started to come out in our support groups at the very beginning. Of course, loneliness and just feelings of isolation was a really big topic, especially being isolated from groups or relationships that people were a part of before 10/7. So no longer feeling safe, no longer feeling on the same page or in the same community. So a lot of disruption in relationships in that way. There's also a disruption of routines. And so feeling like people just couldn't even do some of the simple day-to-day things they used to do. Like they couldn't go to the same coffee shop they used to go to because of stickers that were posted or signs that might be out there. And so really feeling like you can't go to the same spaces you used to go to. And that's the third one, exclusion from spaces. This was especially evident in kind of queer settings, and Josh is going to talk more about that later on in this presentation. There's feelings of disbelief and confusion and fear. And again, obviously this was so common for so many in this community on 10/7, but even more so on 10/8, people would report just kind of their disbelief and shock of how the world reacted, right? And so this really brought people together in our groups. Anxiety, sadness, loss, grief, helplessness, hopelessness, avoidance, all the things we would probably expect, and maybe that many of us felt post 10/7 were really reported a lot in our support groups as well. It was interesting that so many people talked about kind of revisiting their connection or increasing their connection with their Jewish identity. So many rediscovered it. Some discovered it for the first time after October 7th, whereas others did pull away from it as well, and kind of that dichotomy between the two. Typically, the people who came to our groups were the ones who were rediscovering their Jewish identity or really kind of connecting with it more. And then we noticed people were struggling to trust others for obvious reasons, but also to trust themselves. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about traumatic invalidation. Finally, there's the fear of seeking support and seeking therapy, mental health support. And this was especially true on college campuses. Our study really talked about this, and we saw this a bit with when a lot of college students would report that when they would try to go seek therapy at the counseling offices or try to get support, some of them were literally turned away because they were Jewish. Others just didn't feel safe in that environment or didn't know what the therapist might feel or what they were thinking. And so many people stopped seeking support in the general community. So a little bit about trauma, and I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir with everyone who is here, so I might talk about this very, very briefly. But as we all know, there's kind of a continuum or a spectrum, right? From stress to PTSD. And so trauma has so many definitions, but we are looking at it in terms of this deeply distressing or overwhelming experience caused by an event or series of events that are perceived as dangerous and or life-threatening. And so, of course, when someone does go through a trauma, it can really overwhelm one's ability to cope. And so a big part of what we want to do in our groups is to help people feel like they can cope and to help with the traumatic events and the traumatic stress that they've experienced. So really quickly to talk about these three areas, obviously stress is more of the normal physiological and psychological reaction. That's a reaction to perceived stressors or challenges. That's going to include the fight or flight response, the freeze response. So our body's kind of natural reaction. With traumatic stress, that arises when an individual experiences or witnesses events that are intensely distressing or life-threatening. So of course, 10/7, the rise in anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic events that occur to someone or that someone witnesses, protests that are occurring, all of those can fall into this category. And for some people, they recover from this and are able to cope a bit. And for others, these events can really overwhelm an individual's ability to cope. And so that's where it can lead to symptoms of PTSD or full-on PTSD with things like intrusive memories, avoidance, negative changes, obviously in mood, in cognition, and then changes in emotional reactions. All right.
I'm going to go into a bit more detail about intergenerational trauma and offer an example from my group. Intergenerational trauma is also known as multi-generational, transgenerational, or cross-generational trauma, and it refers to the transmission of trauma from one generation to the next, and it occurs when the psychological effects of traumatic experiences or historical memories, whether they be personal or collective, they persist beyond those who directly endured them. This phenomenon is observed in families of Holocaust survivors and also the families of Mizrahi Jews who experienced atrocities like the Farhud. We also see it in indigenous communities affected by colonization and persecution, which in my mind can certainly apply to all Jews. And we also see it in descendants of enslaved people, among others. Interestingly enough, the study of IG trauma began in the 1960s when Israeli psychoanalysts noted that many children of Holocaust survivors exhibited distress even though they had not personally experienced the atrocities. And for example, Sigal in 1973 found that children of Holocaust survivors internalized their parents' trauma, leading to heightened anxiety, depression, and PTSD-like symptoms despite not living through the Holocaust themselves. And Sasha, if we could do the next slide. Intergenerational trauma manifests in several ways. Some of the most common include direct transmission. Parents or close family relatives who have experienced trauma may inadvertently pass it on, their fears, anxieties, and coping mechanisms to their children. And this will often happen through emotional modeling. Children will observe their parents' distress and absorb it as their own. We also have indirect transmission. Parents who have unresolved trauma may be overprotective, emotionally distant, or prone to unpredictable mood swings, which can lead to insecurity and anxiety in their children. We have projective identification. Some parents will unconsciously project their unresolved trauma onto their children, who in turn introject these emotions, experiencing them as if they were their own. And then we have perhaps the one that maybe most of us are familiar with, which is historic memory. This speaks to layers of memory that may lie dormant, memories that are not entirely our own, which collapse the boundaries of time and space. And a contemporary event can awaken them because for generations we've carried the echoes of trauma, stories of pogroms, displacement, and targeted violence passed down through families and communities. We know that the pain of previous generations doesn't simply fade, it imprints itself on the descendants in ways both visible and unseen. And in moments like this, the dormant trauma can rise to the surface. We actually find ourselves not only grieving what has happened today, we're grieving with our ancestors. The past is no longer history, it's present. Sasha, next slide, please. Intergenerational trauma in marginalized communities can manifest in various ways. Emotionally, we see chronic anxiety, depression, guilt, and hypervigilance. Cognitively, we see a deep-seated sense of mistrust, self-doubt, or fatalism about the future. Behaviorally, we see an increased risk of substance abuse, aggression, or emotional suppression. And in terms of family dynamics, it's not uncommon to see patterns of enmeshment or emotional neglect. Next slide, please. So I want to offer one particular example from my group. In November 2024, some of you may remember that Amsterdam experienced a violent outbreak that many in the Jewish community described as a pogrom. The incident involved clashes between Israeli soccer fans and Dutch residents, primarily taxi drivers, who engaged in what some chillingly referred to as quote unquote a Jew hunt. Within my community and support group, the response went far beyond shock, distress, or a sense of unsafety. What I witnessed was a much deeper emotional rupture, an experience that stirred something long dormant, I think, in our collective psyches. Many of us had grown up hearing stories of pogroms, but for many of us, the idea of witnessing such an event in our own time felt unimaginable until it wasn't. There wasn't just fear in the present moment, there was actually the activation of something much older. I think the violence, it not only wounded, I think it awoken a trauma encoded in our communal identity passed down through generations. So I think what unfolded in Amsterdam wasn't merely a contemporary act of hate, it was a reanimation, of a historical wound that had never fully been healed. Next slide, please. Working with intergenerational trauma requires both psychoeducation, in other words, the naming, explaining, and normalizing of the psychological phenomenon, in addition to the exploration of aspects of the psyche which relate to both personal and collective identities, not always mutually exclusive. We're working with Jewish individuals, but I think we're also working with members of a tribe, a nation that originated from Judea, were colonized and have suffered the oldest, most consistent hatred in the world that has only surged since October 7th. So next slide, I'll pass it on to the next person.
Okay, thank you, Josh. So, we're now going to talk a little bit about traumatic invalidation, which everyone here may already be very aware of. I actually wasn't until after 10/7. My training is more analytic, and I really wasn't familiar with dialectical behavior therapy, where this comes from. It wasn't until after probably several months of running support groups, which at this point in time, we've probably run hundreds and hundreds of. At that time, maybe around uh, 100 or so, or two. So I remember being in a presentation with Miri Bar Halpern, who was talking about traumatic invalidation and applying it to the experience of the Jewish community after 10/7. And as I was listening to her speak about these symptoms, I realized that that is what I had been hearing about in our groups for so many months. So let's just go through it a little bit. Um, Again, it's a concept of dialectical behavior therapy. And as you can see here, it's the extreme denial of experiences by an important person, group, or authority. Traumatic invalidation has been applied, so everyone knows, both to individuals as well as marginalized communities. It's been studied the most in the LGBTQ plus community, and now we're really looking at it in the Jewish community since 10/7. So what happens is experiences of a community or an individual are ignored, criticized, you're blamed for things that you don't experience as your fault. Your thoughts, your feelings are misinterpreted by the outside world. Your reality may be denied. And often there are experiences of a double standard or emotional neglect completely. So this can lead to symptoms that we were seeing regularly in our groups. And, first and foremost, people were coming in and just speaking as if the entire world had turned upside down. This was a very common thread. People were in disbelief, they were feeling confused, they were feeling fear, anxiety, and really something that came up over and over was a sense that people were going crazy. They felt there's something wrong with me. I think I'm going crazy. And they were struggling to not only trust others, but I think Sasha already, referred to, they were struggling to trust themselves. And this was an experience that was really pervasive over time. So after learning more about traumatic invalidation, we began to really think about what we can do to gain a sense of what the experience of that might be in our community. And we put together a study that I'm really happy to say was just approved this past week by the IRB, and we'll be launching it within days. And this will be a study done through the Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. It's one of two studies that are launching in the next few days. So one thing we learned was that when communities experience this kind of criticizing, blaming, denying of their reality, and they start to have these kinds of symptoms, the most important thing we can do is be able to bring people together to validate experience and normalize what they are feeling. Because the idea that something is wrong with each individual Jewish person, of course, is not something we want people to feel, and we don't want to pathologize our community, and we don't want to refer everyone to individual therapy. So this is one of the reasons why we think our support groups have been doing so well, is that we are bringing community together, and the community, the peers in these groups are actually supporting each other in normalizing their feelings, their experiences, and helping. That's the first piece of helping each other heal. So I'm going to now turn it over.
Okay. So from traumatic invalidation to another very happy topic on collective grief, which again, I imagine many people here can relate to. So when we talk about collective grief, right, it refers to situations in which both we, the providers of support, the therapists, the clinicians, the facilitators of these groups, and those receiving support, so our clients, our participants, are simultaneously exposed to the same traumatic event or to the same ongoing threat. So unlike traditional models of therapy of support, right, where typically the clinician is outside of the crisis, in a shared traumatic reality, we ourselves are also affected. And so obviously, most people in the Jewish community have felt this. And it's really been this shared traumatic reality for therapists and clients, and for facilitators and participants. This blurred the boundaries between the personal and professional roles, maybe a bit more than is typically blurred in these settings. I know this is similar to what happened during COVID. And initially, we based some of our programs on COVID support groups for the same reason, where, again, the facilitators and the participants were really going through a shared experience. So this is really important for us to point out, and we like to talk about this with our own facilitators a lot, because we are not separate from the pain, and we are part of this collective grief and the fear and the uncertainty and the trauma and the isolation. And so it's important for us to name that and normalize that for ourselves, and to normalize that this dynamic is really crucial, whether it's in individual therapy, but again, especially in our groups. So in other things that we do is we really want to move away from kind of unrealistic expectations that we are emotionally neutral as providers, or that we have it all together. It's okay if we don't. It can deepen the connection that we have with our participants. It shows our own humility. And we notice that participants really trust facilitators more when we acknowledge that we're also, going through a similar process, obviously with appropriate and contained boundaries in acknowledging this. This can make it so difficult to facilitate a support group when we can really relate to everything that is being said, or when we ourselves may feel triggered. So this reminds us that healing can also be mutual, right? That bearing witness to one another, even within the same trauma, can be very powerful and supportive. Something that we do within our program is we do have weekly facilitator meetings, and it's kind of just like a place to support each other as we go through this and as we support the community. And we know that it's so important for us to come together and kind of talk through what's happening in groups, what's happening for ourselves, so that we can have that space and have some, a place to mourn and a place to cope as well. So share this little quote with you that many of you have maybe seen, but an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior, by the wonderful Viktor Frankl. And now, Josh.
Okay. Thanks, Sasha. I think this slide captures the emotional and psychological toll that anti-Semitism and traumatic invalidation can have on members of the Jewish community. These aren't just individual feelings, they're part of a collective experience that's been shaped by historical trauma, ongoing discrimination, and the erosion of trust in societal support systems. For example, after a visibly Jewish student is harassed on campus, they may feel shame, fear, or anger and begin questioning whether it's safe to wear a Star of David or speak openly about their identity. Other Jews may not feel safe speaking in Hebrew on the street, and Jewish professionals might downplay their background or connection to Israel in conversations at work after hearing anti-Semitic comments go unchallenged, in turn internalizing the message that their identity isn't welcome. Some people may distance themselves from the community entirely to avoid being targeted, while others respond by becoming more protective or hypervigilant, feeling like they constantly have to defend their identity or explain their humanity. I think there's often a persistent undercurrent of fear about physical and emotional safety, about how others perceive us, and about whether the future will be any different. When anti-Semitism is minimized, or after a violent anti-Semitic attack is dismissed in public discourse, many Jews may feel gaslit or invalidated, not just by the event itself, but by the silence or the apathy that follows. Similarly, a Jewish person might express pride in their identity online, and then receive hostile messages or notice long-term friends unfollow them. These moments, while seemingly small, cut deeply and reinforce the feeling that our identity makes us unsafe or unwanted. So next slide, I'm gonna turn it over.
Yeah. And to follow up on everything Josh just said, obviously there's also the behavioral and the cognitive reactions as well as physical, right? So in terms of cognitively, it's similar to what we might just expect with any kind of anxious response, PTSD-like response. We might have racing thoughts, troubles concentrating, forgetfulness. Behaviorally speaking, we're going to have our disrupted routines. Changes in appetite are really common, difficulty sleeping, withdrawal from others. So social withdrawal is a huge thing that so many participants talk about. And again, so many of them feel like the support groups are one of the only safe spaces where they feel like they can wear their Jewish star, or they can be Jewish and not really have to worry about it. And then physically, a lot of people have expressed things like just increased muscle tension, increased headaches, fatigue, all the things that where our body is in this fight or flight response, and it's continuous, right? It's not really calming down. Now, for kids and teens, we're not necessarily working with kids and teens quite yet, though we hope to very soon. But we do work with parents of kids and teens, and things that might come up behaviorally for that age group can be things like school avoidance or regression, for example, bedwetting, increased risk taking, decline in school performance, and all those sorts of things.
Hey, Sasha. So here we are going through what the community was experiencing, and many still are, because we're, as Sasha said, we're still in it. We're still in this continuous traumatic stress. So initially, and surprisingly, even at this time, we have really worked with a foundation of psychological first aid, again, that we have been tailoring over many months. We've been doing this for a year and a half now, to meet the needs of the current moment, which is always evolving in our community. But this is still our foundation, and we have been really surprised with how much of a match this has been for the experience of the Jewish community since 10/7. We decided to use this foundation because we saw major disruption in routine. Examples initially were, I think someone mentioned, you couldn't walk to class the same route that you typically did when you were on your college campus. We saw major disruptions in connections, whether you were still physically, in proximity to your friends or not. It really didn't matter, because there were so many emotional breaks, and there was so much discord in relationships that once were intimate. The spaces that people were typically feeling comfortable in, whether it was their educational setting or their work setting, were not necessarily those spaces that they felt safe in any longer. They were feeling like their whole world, as I mentioned earlier, had turned upside down. And so there was a lot that made sense in terms of disaster response to use this as a foundation. And so these are the core concepts of psychological first aid. And what we're trying to do is, for example, fostering a sense of calm during a time where people are feeling, tremendous stress. So how can we find those moments? And again, it's not going to be that all the time we're, able to feel calm, or that we can feel completely calm, but how can we move toward periods or moments of calm when we're feeling enormous stress? Similarly, promoting a sense of safety during a time where so many Jewish people were feeling fearful, unsafe, and really concerned for the future. So what can we do, and what can we implement to help Jewish community feel safe during this time? Restoring a sense of self and community efficacy. For us especially, we were thinking, this isn't just an individual need right now. We really need to experience that our community is going to be okay. So how can we foster that? How can we foster self-efficacy and community efficacy during this time? And certainly fostering connectedness was and still is, I think, one of the, if not the most important pieces of our work. In this country and in other countries, we know that Jewish community is not always close by. So, it's different from in Israel, where everyone, so many are able to be together with other Jews in community. Here, you could be one of the only or the only Jewish person. So people were feeling very disconnected, not only because they lost relationships that were once close, but also because they weren't with other Jewish people. So how can we bring community together so they can feel a sense of belonging and connectedness and maintaining a sense of hope? That is not, always easy in a time that is so bringing us back, as Josh said, to our past traumas and our fears of what's, going to come next. But how can we maintain a sense of hope even in these very, very challenging times? So we're going to start with fostering a sense of calm, and we have some examples of some of the work we've been doing in our groups, but also what we've been thinking about with our wider community. So first and foremost, having a space to process your emotions without judgment. We see pretty much right away once community comes together and they see that others are experiencing some similar kinds of feelings, it immediately starts to calm the distress that they've been feeling, because not only are people upset about what's happening in the world, but they're feeling upset because they feel like something is wrong with them, that they have these feelings. So once they recognize that others are experiencing it too, and that they can share that, that helps reduce distress. Normalizing the response relieves the anxiety. That's what we were just speaking about. So breaking large problems into small, more manageable units. This is something that, happens regularly in our groups. Often we, for example, want to be able to restore the way we were once living. We want to go back to our routine, whether it's a particular kind of hobby or exercise that we always did, and we can't get there. So it feels like, how do we take care of ourselves in this moment? And really what we can do is recognize we may not get right back to where we were, but we can break that down into a smaller, more manageable problem, and we can actually find something that will help us in that moment. And our community does that very well with each other. Subjective units of distress is something we've been teaching community around, how to measure their feeling of stress and anxiety and discomfort in a moment. And that helps us, restore our cognitive thinking, gets us to shift out of that anxiety in the moment, and also helps us recognize what tools we can use to decrease that and help us feel more calm. Some of these are finding ways to be grounded through breathing, meditation, exercise, all of these countless wonderful ways. And something that we've actually done, as Sasha mentioned, we have we have two facilitator weekly meetings. So our community can choose one of those two to come to every week for support. And in one of them, we actually have a meditation specialist who often has ended those sessions with some meditation. And just so everyone here knows, we actually have her, she has meditations on our website. So please feel free they're free. You can access them. They're very short and they're wonderful. She's amazing. And lastly, creating space to experience and share positive emotions, joy, and humor, which is so important. And even in those darkest, most stressful moments, often we find the rhythm of our group, ends with some kind of experience that is shared positive emotion or humor. That is something that, Jews can be quite good at.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. So moving on to the next concept of promoting a sense of safety. It's kind of what it sounds like, but it's very hard to do for so many in this community after October 7th. So here we really will talk in many groups about finding physical and emotionally safe environments whenever possible. Right. We want to normalize the experience of people's intense emotions and acknowledge that that intensity can decrease over time if they're in an environment that is not quite safe, but they have to be in that environment, for example, at work or at school. We also want to help people identify helpers in their life. So people who they can then confide in or who will help advocate for them if they exist. And for some, that is literally people in the group itself. And for others, they are lucky enough to have helpers outside of the groups. And so we will talk about that and help identify those advocates for us. We want to guide people towards a restorative kind of routine, right? Maintaining a routine while also leaving room for flexibility, because obviously that is needed, that is important. But so many people lost their routine after 10/7, and so we talk about how to bring some of that back. A lot of these things are across many of these kind of core principles of PFA, but one of them is to plan for ways to cope in the future. If we have unsafe moments in the future, if we find ourselves in an unsafe environment, how do we cope with that? What do we do when someone approaches us who may not be safe? How do we get out of a situation? How do we respond to a situation? And then how do we, at the same time, avoid avoidance, right? Manage extreme avoidance and return to engaging in life, return to engaging in activities that mean something to us. I want to spend a little bit more time on the managing media exposure, because that's so important right now, as again, I'm sure all of us are aware. And what this comes up all the time in groups, is this idea of curating our content that we're watching, that we're choosing, right? Watching and choosing trusted sources, blocking unhelpful accounts and unfollowing unhelpful accounts or maybe friends who used to be friends. Limiting exposure to sensationalized or disturbing content is a really, really big one. And being aware of when we're looking at this content. Are we looking before we're going to bed, right? Are we looking the first thing when we wake up and that's how we start our day? I don't know if there's a good time to look, but those are probably extra bad times to look. Being mindful of media strategies, right? So remembering kind of that news and social media often do simplify very complex realities. And so recognizing how platforms are designed to keep us engaged and keep us coming back. And then setting boundaries with all the forms of media. So turning off notifications, using do not disturb, using the sleep setting at night, right? Scheduling breaks from your phone, having your Instagram account lock if you've been on it for more than whatever that might be each day, right? 4 hours, no, just kidding. 20 minutes, somewhere in between. Designating specific times to engage with news, as I said, and then even setting a timer to shift our focus, right? Because we just get caught in the doom scrolling loop, and it's very hard to step away from that. So this is something that I know we talk about it for ourselves, but obviously in group, this comes up a lot to help the people that we're working with as well. Gosh.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. In terms of finding our way back to ourselves and our place in community, one of the things we do is we start by noticing what's already working for us, what has helped us to navigate difficult waters. Perhaps it's stepping away from the news, what I'll typically refer to as a news fast. Maybe it's calling someone who puts things in perspective, or even just sticking to a routine which offers familiarity and predictability. We also try to bring to mind what has helped us historically. Sometimes I'll ask a group member, what did you bring to the table in the past when you were suffering? Was it patience, humor, grit? These are capacities which still exist within us and can be called upon again. I think about the importance of acknowledging a normal day, whether it's because you simply made it through or lived according to your values or made a difficult decision or was just present for someone else in need. I think about this type of acknowledgement as an expression of gratitude. I think it keeps our lived experience in perspective, and it can disrupt certain complexes or negative cognitions which suggest everything is wrong and will never get better. Also, hugely important, leaning into what gives us meaning, especially as it relates to our Jewish identity, whether it's the arts, prayer, or values like justice and compassion. communing with Jewish identity and Jewish joy is ancient. And I think there's a deep well of strength in it when we explore it, not just the painful parts, but also the joy, creativity, resistance, renewal. We draw on that legacy in ways that feel personal and empowering. Sasha, next slide, please. Obviously, there's something deeply healing about spending time in spaces where we feel seen, heard, and understood. This could be a community gathering or just being in a WhatsApp group with people who get what you're going through without you needing to explain. I just want to put out there in my support group, we have several individuals who are homebound, they're immunocompromised, or they're living with disabilities. And access to WhatsApp groups or our support groups at JCMHI have been a lifeline for them. And so this can be a very important resource. Shared rituals can also bring a kind of comfort that words can't because they're symbolic. Lighting candles, holidays, reading Jewish texts together, both secular and religious. I just finished Joan Rivers' autobiography, highly recommend it. These small acts hold generations of meaning and remind us that we're part of something much, much larger and something ongoing. And lastly, sometimes the best way to move through suffering is by turning it into action. I'm thinking of the great Maya Angelou, who used to say that bitterness is not helpful, but anger can be very helpful. Showing up for others, volunteering, organizing, giving, creating. These acts of care and resistance, they're not just helpful, they're connective. They remind us that we're not helpless and we're certainly not alone. And so I'll pass it on.
So I'll read this next quote again. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Okay, so to follow up on that and on what Josh was saying, really maintaining the sense of hope is such a huge part of what we found is really vital to give to the Jewish community and to give to our group participants. And so with challenges, and this is kind of, again, similar to what Josh was saying, you know, we can really start to find new meaning in life. And so a lot of people in these groups talk about new parts of their identity that they're discovering, new, whether it's, again, becoming more aligned with some of their Jewish values or their faith, whether it's volunteering more, whether it's whatever it might be, it's kind of this way of finding new meaning. We found that inspiration and how our community is mobilizing is incredibly powerful, right? I mean, we can see that in our own project. We never expected it to go on as long as it did. We thought maybe we'd run groups for like 6 to 8 weeks. And here we are so many, many, many months later, which is both heartbreaking because the community still needs the support, but also incredibly amazing how everyone has come together to provide support for our community. Investing in community and family values, traditions, beliefs can really help increase that sense of hope. Finding meaning through whether it's, again, books, learning, music, art, food. So many people in our groups talk about cooking more Israeli food than they've ever cooked before, trying new recipes, listening to new music, just really connecting with our culture, our faith again. Finding inspiration in the words and ideas of others, and then discussing this in terms of a historical lens. And again, this is very much what Josh was talking about, and that can help foster resilience, right? By acknowledging our survival over millennia, right? And this collective resilience that we as the Jewish community have. So in terms of coping strategies, we do bring up a number of kind of specific coping strategies, maybe as needed in groups, if it seems like it's relevant or helpful, or just depending on what the discussion is in the group. Obviously, we want to help promote coping along the lines of kind of emotional well-being, social, creative, cognitive, physical. And so some of the coping tools that we talk about, Tara already mentioned SUDS, or subjective units of distress. We also use grounding. We'll sometimes talk about the idea of radical acceptance from DBT. idea of active versus passive coping, chargers versus drainers, right? What charges us? People, activities, do they charge our battery or do they drain us? And can we choose to engage more with the things and the people that charge us versus the things and people that drain us? Talk a lot about even role models in the community, both historically and currently, and how inspiring that is, how we can look up to them and kind of use that as examples as well. And then intergenerational resilience. So everything Josh said earlier, um, going from intergenerational trauma, there's also that idea of our resilience as a people. One specific coping tool that we talk about sometimes is this idea of the window of tolerance. And so the window of tolerance, to understand this a little bit, there's kind of this optimal zone that is the window of tolerance in green. And that's where we feel regulated, open, able to process emotions, even when we're faced with challenges. I think much of our community does not often feel in this green window recently, or well, recently since 10/7. And so part of what we're doing is trying to help people get back to this place. Obviously, there's the hyperarousal side, the fight or flight response, right? When stress is pushing us out of that window and we might become anxious or angry or overwhelmed, defensive, or shut down. And then there's the hypoarousal side, which is more of the freeze response, right? Emotionally, feeling emotionally numb, disconnected or dissociated, isolating ourselves and so forth. So sometimes we might bring up these sorts of coping tools within the group just to educate the community if it seems, again, relevant or helpful, depending on what is coming up in a particular group. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Sasha. So I want to start this by recognizing that this is continuous traumatic growth, not post-traumatic growth. And I think, I'm not sure if we've mentioned this already, but I think we have. You know, we are clearly not in post-traumatic growth yet because we are still in continuous traumatic stress. So what we've been finding in our groups and in the community at large is that people are able to experience their distress and also grow tremendously at the same time. And we are seeing incredible growth in our community, incredible strength, people connecting to parts of themselves and doing things they've never done before during this time. So again, this is something that we're starting to think about as continuous traumatic growth. And we're actually thinking of collecting some data on it because it's been so remarkable observing this in our community. I don't even need to really go through, I think, each of these categories, because I think that when you hear the foundation of psychological first aid and each of the core concepts of it, you're learning and understanding how that can foster this continuous traumatic growth. But I would like to say that one of our other studies that's about to launch is looking at young Jewish adults, their experiences of anti-Semitism and the impact on their mental health, age 20 through 35. But we are looking specifically at coping mechanisms in this age group. And one of the reasons why is because we've seen such a tremendous capacity to cope with such challenging times. And we're looking at general coping strategies. We're looking at spiritual coping strategies and cultural coping strategies. As we're hearing today, we're seeing the community access parts of their Jewish identity as ways of coping, whether it's cultural or religious. And it was happening so much that we actually started a brand new group, and I think it's called Rooted, and it's looking at it's helping individuals connect to growing their Jewish identity in ways that feel attuned to what their needs are around their Jewish identity. And it's really looking to foster that kind of growth specifically because we've been seeing it so much in our community. And that's something that's we're very much looking forward to. And you can change this slide, Sasha. So again, these are things that I think Sasha and Josh went over extremely well. These are the ways that we are, promoting continuous traumatic growth, and we're seeing it happening live, whether it's, our community taking part in Jewish history conferences, or learning the Talmud, or learning to speak Hebrew, or taking art classes, or finding meaning through experiencing new relationships. Our what's happened within our groups is that often people not only support each other within the group, but they find ways to connect outside of the group. So they're really experiencing new and very nourishing relationships. Okay.
So I'm going to talk a bit about the impact of 10/7 on queer Jews. I think the queer community has been profoundly impacted by October 7th, as some queer leaders have sought to intertwine the Palestinian cause with queer liberation. As a result, many queer Jews have been targeted, bullied, harassed, and expelled from queer spaces simply for their Jewish identity and or connection to Israel. A recent study by Eshel and a wider bridge reveals that 82% of queer Jewish respondents reported being harassed or expelled in queer spaces. 82%. I just want all of you to take in the gravity of that number. And 41% no longer frequent exclusively queer spaces. For many queer Jews, especially younger ones navigating community, social justice, intimacy, and dating spaces, this experience carries an added layer of collective trauma and grief. Next slide, please, Sasha. I think all of us operate from a sense of self and identity built from many narratives: who we are, where we come from, what we believe, what we stand for, and the communities we belong to. To return once again to the great Maya Angelou, she once said that within each of us is a sacred space that houses this sense of self, and that this space must be kept pristine. She also said this is the space where one will speak with God, or whatever they regard as much larger than themselves. While someone may respectfully approach this space to help us continue learning about ourselves and the world, they may not trespass or violate it. And traumatic invalidation is precisely that. It is a transgression into this deeply personal and sacred space. I think for those of us in the LGBTQ plus community, traumatic invalidation around our Jewish identity and or connection to Israel can be especially painful, a reminder of sacred spaces that have been violated before. For many of us, being queer is cellular and fundamental to our being, and so are these other identities. Many queer Jews that I speak to describe this experience of sharing their identities related to their Judaism as another form of coming out that is fraught with uncertainty. Will they be embraced or ostracized? Will they be told it's just a phase? No, just as being gay is not a phase, neither is being a Jew and feeling a spiritual or religious connection to Israel. Next slide, please. In the support groups that I've led over the past 15 months, the impact of this trauma has been devastating. It's not uncommon to encounter queer Jews who have taken a leave of absence from college after being harassed for being visibly Jewish, queer Jews who have been ignored or refused service at LGBTQ community centers because they have expressed a connection to Israel, queer Jews who have even fled the US, doubting they can find an accepting queer community, individuals who have lost entire friend groups because of their identity, queer Jews who feel pressure to be quote unquote the good Jew who is silent about anti-Semitism, and finally, individuals who fear discrimination when seeking mental health care. I personally regularly receive calls from Canadian Jews and Jews abroad who are struggling to find an appropriate therapist. I think this reality reflects a deep and painful rupture, a violation not just of identity, but of the sacred inner space that should never be trespassed. And I will hand it over.
Thank you, Josh. That's just so painful to really look at what's happening to uh, Jews with intersectional identities, and the compounded trauma that the community is experiencing is really something that is very hard to digest, and yet here we are. So here, the next topic we're going to speak to is working with diverse Jewish community, which is something that Josh introduced. And we are diverse in so many ways. One of the things that was sort of remarkable was after 10/7, shortly after, it seemed like the Jewish community was pretty united. The majority, maybe, of the Jewish community seemed that way. And I think it is an unusual time because, we are so diverse, and Jews just being Jews are typically very, very diverse in opinions and perspectives, as we know. So, as it came closer to the election, we started to see our Jewish community have more discord, more divide, and with heated political experiences and feelings, the community was really starting to struggle. And so, one of the things we did was we started to shift our language, because we know that here is a community that is feeling such a lack of belonging and so much isolation, that the last thing we wanted was for the community to feel that within the groups and with each other. So how can we stay connected across our differences? That was something very, very important to us. And because it was bubbling up in groups for some time, we actually did extensive training with our volunteers on the resetting the table method, which is really looking to build skills on having dialogue across intense differences. And we were seeing that in our community. So really how we began to open our groups often was, we are all here because we all identify as Jewish. And because we identify as Jewish, we are typically going to come here with very different opinions and different perspectives. And we know that is incredibly important for us to be able to create space to listen to each other, so we can understand each other, so we can empathize with each other, and so that we can really create meaning and understanding for our experiences. This allows us to problem solve better together. We know that really diverse perspectives and being able to hear different opinions allows us to have more healthy problem solving. We know that it's a way that we can learn to feel more authentically connected. Okay, we were hearing so often Jewish people were struggling to speak openly, even amongst Jewish communities. So this is something that we really began to focus on within our groups, and really connecting our community in a way that they could experience their own perspectives, their own opinions, and yet still felt like they belonged in their community. Go ahead.
Okay. And really, this is kind of to summarize a lot of what we talked about, and to begin wrapping up. We put together this last slide just kind of as really, again, a summary of what we've learned about engaging with the Jewish community, with Jewish clients, with Jewish participants in our groups. So much of what we've seen is the idea of not offering solutions too quickly, right? I mean, obviously, we know as therapists the importance of listening actively, empathically to the person we are sitting across from. But so many in our community have truly felt like they have not been heard. And so I feel like listening is just extra important at this time within our community. Processing our own reactions, right? Again, we are part of the same community often. And so being able to take care of ourselves as well, staying calm, getting our own support, getting our own care. Actually, with that, one of the groups that we run is a support group for clinicians as well. So if anybody is interested, that is also available. Being prepared for conversations that might come up, right? Being informed, seeing what people are exposed to and processing some of that information together, whether it's something that they've seen on social media or an anti-Semitic attack that occurred or something along those lines, being able to have discussions around that while creating safety, right, in the room or in the Zoom call or wherever it is, physical safety, emotional safety. A big part, again, modeling kind of adaptive and active coping tools and promoting that, again, what's called post-traumatic growth and what we're calling continuous traumatic growth, finding meaning, identifying new goals, new parts of our identity. A big part of that is balancing kind of the being in balancing engagement in our Jewish identity, right? The positive aspects of being Jewish, our traditions, our culture, our food, our music, our role models, and then sharing stories, right? Stories of survival, of strength, of resilience, whether stories that are currently happening or stories of the past. You know, in the Jewish community, these narratives of survival and cultural preservation and collective identity have fostered such a strong sense of resilience, and we really want to bring those to focus, point those out. There's so many traditions and communal bonds that serve as protective factors for our community, and so we can help navigate the challenges of anti-Semitism and everything going on by drawing from strength from our history. Okay, so last but not least, our quote of the evening: we can't choose to vanish the dark, but we can choose to kindle the light, by Dr. Edith Eger, who is a Holocaust survivor and wrote this book, The Choice, and is wonderful if you haven't had a chance to listen to her speak. So
There's actually,
what? Go ahead, Tara.
there's actually going to be a documentary about her and 10/7 survivors coming out in the coming months. So
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing and maybe open it up to questions. But if anybody does want to contact us, our website is JCMHI, Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. .com, and you can always email us at admin@jcmhi.com and follow us on Instagram. So let me stop sharing.
Just say big thank you to the three of you. I mean, what an elegant and thorough presentation, and your neshama, like all three of you, just shines right through. And the amount of work you've been able to do and the amount of healing you've been able to facilitate since the project's inception is truly iconic. And it's an honor to have listened to you for this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helena.
thank you so much.
Oh,
I'll throw a question out if that's okay. I didn't hear anybody else. So, have you noticed any specific themes of struggle or recovery in participants who are also engaged in advocacy, leadership, or other public visibility around Jewish identity and causes?
I mean, I'm sure we all can speak to that. I think, you know, one thing that at least I've observed is that there's such a need to find balance, which is also extremely difficult to do during this time. And I think that while the advocacy and the work to fight anti-Semitism or things along those lines can be nourishing to an extent, there is also a need to be nourished in other ways and to take breaks for your health. So I think that's what we've seen. There are times that people are, maybe struggling to take a pause to do some other kind of self-care or some other experience, some other way of nourishing another part of themselves. And it can be quite exhausting, and yet I think finding balance is often key.
I'll go ahead and answer the question in the chat about an equivalent to JCMHI in LA. And so so something about us is we really are trying to be as broad as possible. We have groups for people all across the country. We have people coming from other countries. We have participants from Israel, from England, from Mexico. So we really, because these are support groups versus therapy groups, we're able to really serve a wide population. With that, we're also trying to really expand in LA specifically. So we have one group that is just for individuals in LA, and we're hoping to start a couple more probably for LA specific organizations and just individuals living in LA. So yes, definitely. Hopefully that answers your question, and you can go to the website and kind of find some of the specific groups that we have.
Yeah, actually, we have a grant now from Jewish Federation of LA, so it is an area that we are going to begin focusing more on. But as Sasha said, we're national as well as international. So even though we don't have like several specific LA groups at the moment, people can come to our groups from all over the world and all over the country.
Mm. Tara, did you want to answer Helena's question in the chat?
Out of the chat, what does it say?
See.
Let's see.
Helena, do you want to just read it?
Why not? Okay. How do you, as leaders of JCMHI, find working with the foundation? I know several of the people here are thinking about looking into grants or collaboration there. Especially with the current climate at APA, there's nerves, tension. So, any advice on getting engagement, allyship, buy-in, getting a read on whether someone is going to be willing to go there with you?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to answer that question because we've been collaborating with the American Psychological Foundation officially since June. But even before that, it took months for us to raise funds and work collaboratively with them doing that initially, and then becoming underneath their umbrella in June of 2024. And we have had the most incredible support, like far beyond what I could have imagined. Not only, do they understand our needs and work tirelessly to meet them, I sometimes worry that we're taking up too much of their time because we are sort of the guinea pig initiative for direct action right now with APF. And we're learning together what the needs of this developing initiative are that continues to grow and may even outgrow where we are. So they have been just beyond supportive. I highly recommend collaborating with APF. And their direct action initiatives are expanding. I've heard that they have a lot of interest and applications for them, and I couldn't be working with a better team, and I know Sasha feels the same way, and Josh will be meeting them very soon, which we're so excited about.
That's so lovely to hear, you guys. Seriously, so lovely to hear.
Yeah, they've literally been incredible. They've been so supportive and just really wonderful to work with.
Mm-hmm.
See here. There's another question. Do you have any advice around facilitating groups when people have diversity of opinions on the war, what should happen in the Middle East, etc., and the expression of those opinions has the potential to cause traumatic invalidation within the group? Hard to find the balance between welcoming all parts of folks plus ensuring as much safety as possible. Is a fantastic question and definitely something that happens in group. Josh, Tara,
yeah, I'm happy to say a little bit. I think to return to Tara's slide, one of the first things that we often do in groups is acknowledge that we are all Jewish, right? This is what brings us together. This is why we're here. For myself personally, in my group, I am a big advocate of nonviolent communication, which I see as the best practice, I think, in all relationships, including support groups. And so I think when there is a model for speaking, for expressing oneself that is essentially nonviolent, that is rooted in one's subjective experience, it's not judgmental, it's not accusatory. One is speaking from the heart. I think that often goes a long way And what I found in my group is, yeah, there is diversity of opinion, but over time, rapport develops. People don't want to hurt each other. They understand that there are differences, but they also understand that they care about the people who may think and feel differently than them. And so I think once you get that rapport going, and you utilize some sort of model of communication like nonviolent communication, I think we tend to do pretty well.
I just want to say I agree with Josh, and I really I think that we feel so much more connected when we are able to express ourselves authentically and when we can hear each other out. Danielle is raising her hand.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. I am in Los Angeles. I'm a therapist in a community mental health, nonprofit community mental health clinic, and I'm very interested in joining your group for clinicians. I had an experience recently, so it's not in group process, but individual, sitting across from somebody who held such anti-Semitic opinions, um and I don't, she's not aware that I'm Jewish. And it was very hard to hold space for her and be present and to not want to cut off the session with some makeup excuse because it felt very unsafe for me. I wanted to just sort of exit with an excuse, but to try to yeah, so just to allow space for her to talk about such vile things against my people was very hard. And I found you by accident, just scrolling through social media and coming across somebody else's posts about you. Um, but even trying to get my organization on board with more DEI that's inclusive to Jews has been very difficult as well. So I'm looking forward to learning more about the group that you're holding for clinicians. I don't know when it is and if it's going to work with the schedule here because we, on the Pacific, time zone. But yeah, lots of feelings and lots of stuff coming up for me about that.
Danielle, that sounds so incredibly painful and hard. And thank you for sharing with us. I know I personally can relate so much with that experience in individual therapy with a couple of clients I have. I am here in the Bay Area in California. So there's definitely quite a diverse range of opinions. And many of
Yeah.
my clients don't know that I'm Jewish either. So I can very much relate. I think this is something that comes up a lot. Obviously, it comes up a lot on the Jewish Therapist Collective Facebook group, and very much so many people experience, but in our clinician group as well. We'd love to support you. It is unfortunately kind of an early group for us West Coasters. I believe our group is Fridays at 7 a.m. Pacific time.
Oh, yeah.
So, but if we are able to do a later one to really support those on the West Coast, we'd love to do that as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that if you're able. Thank you. And I'm just learning. I'm so glad I'm here because I'm not familiar with the Jewish collective either. So I'm learning a lot today. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, Helena, please say.
And yeah, so it's not a support group, it's more of like a consult group, but if it's stuff having to do with clinical peers and grad school, we deal with everything from grad students, being forced to sit in a class with an anti-Semitic professor to, people dealing with internships and boards and, challenging clients and people who might be Jewish but have different intersections of identity than the clinician. And it's also a space for, like, our Friday drop-in group is also a space for allies and aspiring allies and for folks who've been called in so that they have a non-judgmental space. So if you ever need to pop in somewhere, and it's okay that it's not super, it's more consulty than support groupy, but that's Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 Eastern, and it's free and it's listed on our website. But we also have like little workshops and webinars during, like, various things in various months. So like in January, we did Jewish considerations in OCD care, because people think that it's just about observance, and there's so much more than that. We did a Jewish considerations in eating disorder care. We did for Holocaust, for Yom HaShoah, we featured an art therapist who was talking about art created in the camps and why it's important to memorialize and meaning make and stuff like that. So and we love getting a chance to connect with JCMHI, and the three of you are just incredible. So it's one of my favorite things is to host really incredible people, because I think it's a nice way to sort of amplify good work that's going on. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Look who's talking, really. We're so honored,
Right.
so honored to be here and to be collaborating with you. So thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like we're all in this together. It takes a community, and just so grateful to have these connections and support each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, any other questions for our incredible speakers tonight? Anybody? Okay. Well, I want to mention you can find, do you guys have that last page? Do you want to pop it back up for a second if it's still there?
Oh, I might have closed it, but
Okay,
hold
it's
on.
okay.
Let me see if I can.
Or you can just say aloud how they can find you.
Hold on, I got it. I got it.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah,
see. But yes,
yeah.
they can find us on our website at jcmhi.com. It's a mouthful, but Jewish Community Mental Health Initiative. You can email us. We have a few emails. The easiest one to remember is probably admin@jcmhi.com. Follow us on Instagram at Jewish C. Don't forget the C, mental health. So those are some ways, but yes, please email us. I saw there was a question in the chat about if someone's interested as a facilitator. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a Google form for any facilitators who might be interested in joining, and that's on our website, or you can just email us at the admin account and I can send that your way as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And just want to add, on our Instagram account, we have some wonderful short articles. For example, Tara wrote one called Dear Jewish Parents, which was so beautiful, a letter to Jewish parents who are watching their children suffer. Tara wrote another one about collective grief, which was hugely popular. So we do have these wonderful articles, which are easy to share on our Instagram account.
Josh's amazing article, Reclaiming the Jewish Experience. So yes.
Thank you.
One more thing. I know that a lot of us have a ton on our plates, but there are always ways to scale things. Like, remember in grad school, the refrain was like, teach clients how to slice it thinner. I think maybe that was from EFT. I don't know. But if you can sign up to facilitate a group, cool. If you can't, sharing the JCMHI's Instagram posts through stories on your Instagram, in emails to friends and colleagues. If you think of a client who might really benefit from that additional point of contact, all of that is really important.
Yeah.
So there are many ways to not just get involved, but if for some reason it's not a good fit for you right now, to jump in and facilitate a group, amplifying the work of the people who are, the articles, the research projects, all really excellent forms of advocacy. Advocacy is not just about standing, in an intersection with a sign. It's about making sure that we see what good is happening in our community and we shout it from the rooftops and we get it to the people who need it and we celebrate and thank the people who are doing it. And thank you again, you three. And all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helene.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you for having us, Lena. Thank you, everyone, for being here together.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn the recording off, but if anybody wants to chat, I'll be here for another few minutes, keeping the room open.